Good morning, my sweet friends. We just left in a really dramatic part, and I loved reading your predictions about what you think might happen to Hector/Zero once he heads out into the wasteland, basically all the dry desert. So we're in chapter 31. Stanley angrily dug his shovel into the dirt. He was angry at everyone. Mr. Pendanski, the warden, Zigzag, X-Ray, and his no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. But mostly he was angry at himself. He knew he never should have let Zero dig part of his hole for him. He still could have taught him to read. If Zero could dig all day and still have the strength to learn, then he should have been able to dig all day and still have the strength to teach. What he should do, he thought, was to go after Zero. But he didn't. None of the others helped him dig Zero's hole, and he didn't expect them to. Zero had been helping him dig his hole. Now he had to dig Zero's. He remained out on the lake, digging during the hottest part of the day, long after everyone else had gone in. He kept an eye out for Zero, but Zero never came back. It would have been easy to go out after Zero. There was nobody to stop him. He kept thinking that's what he should do. Maybe they could climb to the top of the Big Thumb. If it wasn't too far away, and if it was the same place where his great-grandfather found refuge, and if, after 100 years or so, water was still there, it didn't seem likely, not when an entire lake had gone dry. And even if they did find refuge on Big Thumb, he thought, they'd still have to come back here eventually. Then they'd have to face both the warden and her rattlesnake fingers. Instead, he came up with a better idea, although he didn't quite have it figured out yet. He thought that maybe he could make a deal with the warden. He'd tell her where he had really found the gold tube if she wouldn't scratch Zero. He wasn't sure how he'd make this deal without getting himself in deeper trouble. She might say, "Tell me where you found it or I'll scratch you too." Plus, it would mean X-Ray would get in trouble too. She'd probably scratch him up as well. X-Ray would be out to get him for the next 16 months. He dug his shovel in the dirt. By the next morning, Zero still hadn't returned. Stanley saw one of the counselors sitting guard by the water spigot outside the shower wall. Mr. Pendanski had 2 black eyes and a bandage over his nose. "I always knew he was stupid," Stanley heard him say. Stanley was required to dig only one hole the next day. As he dug, he kept a constant watch out for Zero, but never saw him. Once again, he considered going out on the lake to look for him, but he began to realize that it was already too late. His only hope was that Zero had found God's thumb on his own. It wasn't impossible. His great-grandfather had found it. For some reason, his great-grandfather had felt the urge to climb to the top of the mountain. Maybe Zero would feel that same urge, if it was the same mountain, and if the water was still there. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't impossible. There had been a storm just a few days ago. Maybe Big Thumb was actually some sort of natural water tower that caught and stored the rain. It wasn't impossible. He returned to his tent to find the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendanski all waiting for him. "Have you seen Zero?" the warden asked him. "No." "No sign of him at all?" "No." "Do you have any idea where he went?" "No." "You know you're not doing any favors if you're lying," said Mr. Sir. "He can't survive out there for more than a day or two." "I don't know where he is." All 3 stared at Stanley as if they were trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Mr. Pendanski's face was so swollen he could barely open his eyes. They were just slits. "You sure he has no family?" the warden asked Mr. Pendanski. "He is a ward of the state," Mr. Pendanski told her. "He was living on the streets before he was arrested." "Is there anybody who might ask questions? Some social worker who took an interest in him?" "He has nobody," said Mr. Pendanski. "He was nobody." The warden thought a moment. "Okay, want you to destroy all his records?" Mr. Pendanski nodded. "He was never here," said the warden. Mr. Sir nodded. "Can you get into the state files from your computers?" she asked Mr. Pendanski. "I don't want anyone in the AG's office to know he was here." "I don't think I can erase him completely from all the state files," said Mr. Pendanski. "Too many cross-references. But I can make it so it would be very difficult for anyone to ever find a record of him. Like I said, though, no one will ever look. Nobody cares about Hector Zeroni." "Good," said the warden. So basically, when they say ward of the state, he had no parents or guardians at that time, and so he was like in and out in foster care and living in homeless shelters. So they're trying to say no one would even care about him if he went missing. Chapter 32. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Group D. His name was Brian, but X-Ray called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned to Zero's bed and Zero's crate. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. He claimed he could break into a car, disconnect the alarm, and hotwire the engine all in less than a minute. "I never planned to, steal one," he told him. "But sometimes, I'll be walking past a real nice car parked in a desert area and, I'll just start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you just see me when I'm behind the wheel of a car. The next thing I know, I'm behind the wheel. When I'm around the car. The next thing you know is I'm behind the wheel. Stanley lay on the scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away or if he had just gotten used to it. "Hey, caveman," said Twitch. "Do we really have to get up at 4:30? "You get used to it," Stanley told him. "It's the coolest part of the day." He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he made it to the Big Thumb or... What worried him the most, however, wasn't that it was too late. What worried him was the most, what really ate his insides, was the fears that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately crawling across the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mind. The next morning, out on the lake, Stanley listened as Mr. Pendancy told Twitch the requirements for the hole, as wide and as deep as your shovel. Twitch fidgeted. His fingers drummed across the wooden shaft of his shovel, and his neck moved side to side. "You won't be twitching so much after digging all day," Mr. Sir told him. "You won't have the strength to wiggle your pinky." Then he plopped some sunflower seeds in his mouth, deftly chewed them, and spat out the shells. "This isn't a Girl Scout camp." The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet, ahead of Twitch. What if it's not too late? He watched Mr. Sir fill X-Ray's canteen. The image of Zero crawling across the hot dirt remained in his mind. But what could he do about it? Even if Zero was somehow alive, or after more than 4 days, how would Stanley ever find him? It could take days. He'd need a car. Or a pickup truck. A pickup truck with a tank of water in the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly backed away from the line and circled over to the side of the truck. He looked through the windows. There they were, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath and steadied himself before he tried to think clearly. He'd never driven before. But could it be? How hard could it be? This is crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he'd have to do it quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. If it's too late, he told himself, Zero couldn't have survived. But what if it wasn't too late? He took another deep breath. Think about this, he told himself, but there wasn't time to think. He flung open the door of the truck and climbed inside. "Hey!" shouted Mr. Sir. He turned the key and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared, but the truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running around the side of the truck. The door was still open. "Put it in gear!" shouted Twitch. The gear shift was on the floor next to the seat. Stanley pulled the lever back till the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat and tightly gripped the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot was pressed to the floor. The truck went faster. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake bed. It bounced over a pile of dirt. Suddenly, Stanley slammed forward, then instantly backward as an airbag exploded in his face. He fell out of the open door and onto the ground. He had driven straight into a hole. He lay in the dirt staring at the truck, which stood lopsided on the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather this time. This was his own fault, 100%. He'd probably just done the stupidest thing he had ever done in his short and miserable life. He managed to get to his feet. He was sore but didn't think he had any broken bones. He glanced at Mr. Sir, who remained where he was, staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck. It banged against his chest as he ran, and every time it hit against him, it reminded him that it was empty, empty, empty. We're going to read a little bit more. Chapter 33. He slowed to a walk. As far as he could tell, nobody was chasing him. He could hear voices coming from back by the truck, but couldn't make out the words. Occasionally, he'd hear the revving of an engine, but the truck wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. He headed back to what he thought was headed into the direction that he thought that was the Big Thumb. He couldn't see it through the haze. Walking helped calm him down and allowed him to think clearly. He doubted he could make it to the Big Thumb, and with no water in the canteen, he didn't want to risk his life on the hope that he'd find refuge there. He'd have to return to camp. He knew that, but he was in no hurry. It'd be better to return later after everyone had a chance to calm down. And as long as he'd come this far, he might as well look for Zero. He decided to walk as long as he could until he was too weak to go any further. Then he'd turn around and go back. He smiled as he realized that wouldn't quite work. He would only go halfway as far as he thought he could go, so that he could still have the strength to return. Then he'd have to make a deal with the warden, tell her where he found Kate Barlow's lipstick tube, and beg for mercy. He was surprised by how far out the holes extended. He couldn't even see the camp compound anymore, but he still kept passing holes. Just when he thought he passed the last hole, he'd come across a cluster of them a little further away. Back up the compound, they dug in a systematic order, row upon row, allowing space for the water truck. But out here, there was no system. It was as if every once in a while, in a fit of frustration, the warden would just pick a spot at random and say, "What the heck, dig here." It was like trying to guess the winning numbers in a lottery. Stanley found himself looking down into each hole he passed. He didn't admit to himself what he was looking for. Obviously 0. After about an hour had gone by and he thought he had seen the last hole, but then off the left he saw another cluster of them. He didn't actually see the holes. He saw the mounds of dirt surrounding them. He stepped over the mounds and looked into the first hole. His heart stopped. Down at the bottom was a family of yellow spotted lizards. Their large red eyes looked up at him. He leapt back over the mound and ran. He didn't know if they were chasing after him. He thought they might have seen one leap out of the hole. He ran until he couldn't run any further. Then he collapsed. They hadn't come after him. He sat there a while and caught his breath. As he got back to his feet, he thought he noticed something on the ground, maybe 50 yards away. It didn't look like much, maybe a big rock, but in a land of nothingness, anything seems unusual. He walked slowly toward it. The encounter with the lizards made him very cautious. It turned out to be an empty sack of sunflower seeds. Mr. Sir, he wondered if it was the same one Magnet had stolen from Mr. Sir, although that didn't seem likely. He turned it inside out and found one seed stuck to the burlap. Lunch. Okay, we're going to stop there. I want you to tell me what you think. If you think that Stanley is going to find 0 alive, if you think he's going to turn around before he finds him, do you think the warden's going to come after him? Let me know what your prediction is, and I will see you soon at morning meeting.